Hi and welcome back to a new video. Yeah, it's been over 2 years that we've shot a Q&A video on this channel, which is interesting, especially if I go back all the time, when I started doing YouTube regularly, then Q&A was part of my basic video, I would say. So I think at some point, almost every second video was a Q&A, because it was very helpful to get into the YouTube algorithm and just to get things going with shooting videos on a regular basis without having to invest too much money. But at some point I don't know, I didn't have the time to do it. I also didn't want to do it at some point because just too much things also changing in my private life, which I wanted to avoid, getting the questions and stuff. But now, yeah, it's been a long time, and I thought it's maybe a good opportunity to just sit down, have a good chat with you guys and just discuss a few things. I had over 200 questions. I picked out about 20 of these. No clue how long this is going to take. Maybe I will split it into 2 videos. I will see. So let's get things started. The Seasonic PX 2200 is currently one of the strongest PSUs available, and it comes with 2 native PCIe 5.1 connectors, which allows to even hook up natively to RTX 5090. That is perfect for any overclocking system or high-end workstations. I'm also currently running this PSU, and so far I'm really satisfied with its quality and performance. The cables are very flexible, there are also cable comms included, and in addition also a 90-degree ATX 24-pin adapter, which also functions as a PSU tester at the same time. The fan is semi-passive, and even at a high load it is still very quiet. Find all information about this PSU in the link in the description. So most important question first, how are the cats doing? That is also one of the reasons where I just figured out time flies, because Sheik is over 6 years old now, Makita is getting 3 years old. Both cats are doing perfectly fine. Just Sheik, at some points, sometimes it's a bit annoying because cats are very night active, and especially Sheik. She has like the perfect alarm clock. If I wanted to get up every day at 4:30, that would be perfect, because at 4:30 Sheik demands food. And then at like 4:45 she demands food again, and again at like 5. That's how it's going basically every day. You can also see that Sheik gained a bit of weight, maybe a bit too much weight. I'm trying to control it, but it's also at the point where she had an operation, and at that point it was a bit difficult for her. And Makita is in the transition of also becoming too much of a snack cat, but I'm trying to fight it, that she's not gaining too much weight. But both cats are like perfectly fine, and I'm really happy to have both of them. What about Project Irrationality 2? That is something I wanted to start already this year, originally in summer. I already started buying some of the components, like RAID controller and like motherboard and CPU. But honestly, in that moment, I just didn't have the time, because we also had a difficult situation with Thermal Grizzly at some point. I will get to that in a bit. And that's why I just had to focus more on Grizzly and not on YouTube. And especially with such a broad project that will take up a lot of time, I did not want to do it just in that moment right away. But it's definitely planned. And I also thought of maybe doing Project Irrationality, maybe in between, because now I also thought my current PC, Project Irrationality, is like 6 or 7 years old, and I can definitely feel that it's no more latest tech, like far from that. And if I want to play something aside from PUBG, it quickly becomes a challenge, like for especially the GPU. The Titan RTX, it's not a bad graphics card, but it's basically an RTX 2080 Ti, right? And a 2080 Ti these days is no longer by far a strong GPU. And also the CPU sometimes is a bit challenging. Also for video editing, I can feel that I'm definitely missing out on just upgrading to a newer system. And then I just thought in between of something that is a bit easier to build, a little bit quicker, and maybe not as much power draw, but I just didn't have the time to do it. What is the future of YouTube channel? Do you think you might do spin-offs, video uploads more often, big projects? Love watching your channel and wish you continued success. Thanks a lot for the question. And that is a very tough question to answer. It's something I've been thinking about for many years already. That is something I can definitely say, because it's becoming more and more difficult for me to be in this, situation of having a job, and also, well, YouTube is also a job, right? But having my noble job during the week and then doing YouTube at the weekend. There's this thing that a couple of days ago, interestingly, it popped up on my YouTube studio that says, congratulations for 15 years of uploading YouTube videos. And while it's not 15 years that I've been doing this on a regular basis, it's more than 10 for sure. And I think something between 1,500 to like 2,000 videos. So it's definitely a lot. And also with changes. At the beginning, I did just like a video once every month, and then it became more regular. And I always had a job in between, right? I was never doing YouTube as full-time sole job. I always had a normal job, I would call it. Like I was the engineer at Case King doing product development from 2014 to like 2020, 2021. I would have to check the date. But I always had like a 40-hour at least job from Monday to Friday. And then I was doing YouTube at the weekend. And especially at a time when I was doing 2 videos per week, this was a big challenge. 2 videos meant for me that I was doing at least 1 video Saturday and Sunday, and then another video during the week, like maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, or just splitting. And that was a very tough time, and I definitely had to cut it down in the amount of hours I was putting into this, because you have to realize, obviously, you know, that a 15-minute video does not need 15 minutes of, you know, shooting preparation, right? It takes a lot more. It starts from just doing the concept of the video you want to do. You might have to organize things, buy hardware, test the hardware, especially if it's a big review, like GPU reviews, they take so much time to prepare, sometimes a couple of days. Then doing data analysis, preparing charts, all of these kind of things, and then also advertisement. So I have those pre-roll spots on my videos, right? I try to keep this as simple as possible, so I'm often using the same spot a couple of times, but still, you know, you have to be in communication with the vendor. You have to set up contracts. You have to get the hardware. You have to create the text, shoot the video, and all of these kind of things. So everything together, I would say, each video for me is between 10 and 20 hours of work, and that's also why I had to cut it down from doing 2 videos per week to only max 1 video per week. And sometimes I couldn't even do this during this year because it was just too much workload overall to constantly deliver the YouTube content I want to deliver. And now, especially with Grizzly, it's becoming more and more of a challenge for me because I want to keep my videos independent, which is already a problem, you know. Having your own company, you're always biased to a certain degree. And that's why I'm trying to avoid a lot of topics already. For example, I wouldn't do thermal paste comparison of Arctic versus Grizzly, right? Because I would be fully biased. And now that we're expanding more and more into, you know, more components, like this year we expanded a lot into the like full custom water cooling stuff, and it will be more, right, over the years. And that will also mean for me personally more challenges to keep my YouTube videos neutral and not biased and fair, because I want them to be fair also to the competition, because I respect them and I would expect the same from them. But it also means that at some point I will have to decide what to do, and it will probably mean that I will have to cut down the videos even further, maybe do 1 every 2 weeks for both the sake of the workload in terms of how much time I'm putting into this, but also in terms of being fair and trying not to cross borders, you know, and try to just work on my own content. Maybe I will more do like experiments and then more of some retro funny stuff. I will see. But it's definitely something I'm thinking of, and obviously at some point I will have to at least do very irregular video uploads, maybe 1 per month or something, or stop YouTube at a certain point. Because after all this time, it also always meant issues for me as, you know, as a person. Because if you're thinking about it for years, spending every weekend doing videos, it means I have no time for something else, right? No time for friends, no time for family, which is something I often regret. I miss a lot of the friends and families and always wish I would have more time to spend with them or for them, which I obviously have, but I'm just using my time for YouTube. And I just have to find the balance for myself there and see where things go. I will definitely not stop YouTube for the moment, but at some point, things will probably change. Why do you no longer film your videos at home in your studio? there are basically two answers to that question. So the first one is that I wanted to have more clear differentiation or distinction between being at work and being at home. Because in the past it was always the same for me. You know, I was working at home and then you never find really the break, never find the feeling of being at home and not at work. And that's why I just wanted to have just a separation of being at home and being at work. And I also have more space here. So this is the same building where we have Thermal Grizzly. And the second question is also that it's in a different state. So originally my office, and that's also where I live, is Berlin-Spandau. Like Spandau is a district of Berlin. And Berlin is also a state inside of Germany. And each state or like bigger district, they have their own tax offices. And I'm not sure what it is exactly, but the Berlin-Spandau or Berlin tax offices, they are very special for whatever reason. So I have multiple companies, you know, in multiple states, and they are actually usually quite easy to work with. I never had any issues with any of them, except for the tax office in Berlin-Spandau. I think it's mainly related because Berlin is a city that is very deep into debt and they just try to get money possibly from wherever they can. But I had this very special moment last year, and that's maybe a transition for a different question, which is if I still feel being close to a burnout and if I found a way to reduce my workload. And before I continue with the tax office story, it is probably unlikely that I would get a burnout. I sometimes had a situation where I felt that the workload is very much for me and I have to reduce it just to stay healthy. But being in the situation, doing what I love, and I honestly love what I'm doing. Like every single day, there is nothing I would love to do more than just doing exactly this. That's not only YouTube, but also, you know, Thermal Grizzly. You could give me €1 billion and I would still do exactly this because this is absolutely my passion. And I think this is very important to avoid getting a burnout or just not getting in this situation. So last year there was this time, I think it was in November, I was coming home from work and it was already a quite tough time. And then I opened my mailbox and I had 7 yellow letters inside. And in Germany, yellow letters mean nothing good. You know, they might come from police or whatever. And in my case, it was from tax office. And they sent me 7 letters, that they were investigating cases of tax evasion against me in a height of 60,000 euros. And at that point, I was like, what the hell? The worst was not only that I read all of this, but that they did not give details what it was about. And I was absolutely confused. Because you have to know the way this works. It works different for different people, but at least for me, I have my accountant, and my accountant has access to all of my bank accounts. And everything is digitally locked, right? So every transaction that's done, every money that comes in, goes out, is automatically assigned to invoices and stuff. There's basically nothing that can go wrong, nothing that you can miss. Because at the end of a year, if you're even missing €1, it will tell you exactly that you're missing an invoice or that there is like an open payment or whatever. So I was like, how is this possible and where should I do tax evasion of 60,000 euros? And the issue was that there was like nothing written in those letters what it was about. So I had to get a lawyer for tax evasion, which is something very special and also very expensive. And the nice thing was that the day after I got those letters, because it was very tough for me, I had sudden deafness. So I lost hearing on my right ear because of the pure pressure being so much, because I was so confused of what was going on. And that was terrible. That was a terrible time. Not like a burnout, but I could feel that it's doing things to my body, you know. And not funny story, but you know, in the end, it all came down to things not being properly or correctly booked. So the entire issue was that YouTube earnings, like a video I'm doing now, for December were transferred to my bank account on January. And then my accountant booked it on January. But the right thing apparently would have been to book it in December. So long story short was the 60,000 euros were fully paid, like there was no tax evasion or anything. It was just all shifted by 1 month. Everything was shifted by 1 month for like 7 years. And the biggest problem was they reached out, apparently, the tax office to Google to get all the payments that I received for like 7 years, I think it was the period. And then they just thought this does not align with what was like transferred from my accountant to the tax office. And then they just went full out for tax evasion and all these kind of bullshit, you know? But in the end, it was that everything was paid, there was no tax evasion, and it was all just shifted by 1 month. Yeah. It would have been so easy to solve this by just sending an email, sending a letter asking for, like, do you know where this difference comes from? And it was obvious after my lawyer reached out to the tax office and asked for the paper, for the details to figure it out. But yeah, that was terrible. That was absolutely terrible because I was sure everything I'm doing is done 100% correct. And, you know, seeing especially that amount of money, I was like, yeah, that can't be right. And then losing my hearing on the right ear, sudden deafness because of the load, because of the tax office doing this, I thought there's no way I'm dealing with this again. And that was one of the reasons why I moved to here, because then I don't have to deal with tax office Berlin anymore. So I hope to, yeah, if somebody of them sees this, I hope that I never have to talk to you again. Interesting, completely different question is if I can imagine to move to a different country, which is something I honestly wouldn't want to do. I'm in a lucky situation that I was able to travel so many places all around the world, may it be in Asia, you know, like Taiwan, China, Thailand, Vietnam, and like North America, partially South America, Africa. There's so many countries I visited, were able to visit. And that also helped me to understand, to honor, and to just appreciate what I have here. It's starting from the social security system, because in Germany you can go all in with everything you're doing. You can risk everything, because even if, you know, if YouTube fails, if my company fails, I would not end up on the street. I would just be able to just get a flat for free, basically. You would get base healthcare. So there's a lot of things that I appreciate in just Germany, and also it's my native language. I have friends and family and everything here. That's why I wouldn't want to move out, even though obviously there's always things that are not perfect here, but I think that's the case in every country. No matter where you go, there's always something that just is not right, or you feel it's maybe not fair, but I think that's the case probably everywhere, and I just feel home here. Could you give us a small insight or maybe a sneak peek on what you're working on with Thermal Grizzly, or what you're thinking about working with? And that's maybe a question I can connect with another question, that is, in which of the fields in the hardware sector or business I still see potential, or things where we want to expand into. So first of all, with Grizzly, we mainly want to focus on what we're already doing, right? So we want to keep doing the special things like a deleter, or like direct die blocks and WireView Pro 2. So mainly items that we can just do ourselves, and we are probably better than others, especially when it comes to development. Also faster sometimes, and where we have the possibility to have a good margin, which is just needed for us, especially operating in Germany. That's also why we want to mainly focus on custom water cooling at the moment. So we will definitely expand into, you know, doing tubing, maybe hard tubing, radiators and stuff. So just have the full portfolio of custom water cooling items. That's definitely what we are working on, what we will keep working on. And to go to the other question, so for example, for the majority of other components, especially, you know, things that are obvious, like GPUs, motherboards, memory, all these kind of things, that would not happen under Thermal Grizzly brand. But then you might think, but what about like a simple air cooler, or like AIOs or cases? And especially this specific market of air coolers, AIOs and cases is, I think, the market with the highest competition in our industry. And this is also the one that has the most competitive pricing, for example, especially of how things developed in the past. You know, if you go back 15 years ago, maybe, or 10 years ago, you had the Chinese companies that they were specialized in maybe making AIO heat pipe coolers or AIOs, but they did not have the direct access to, for example, the European or the US market. So they had their OEM partners that were doing partially the product development maybe, or product design, and then they were ordering the AIOs or air coolers from that company, from the factory, and then basically doing more or less like trading, you know. But these days it changed that the factories at some point they realized, with the more global economy and things like AI and possibilities of translations and all of this, they now have very good access to the markets directly. So they don't need the OEMs anymore. And they realized that, for example, like Thermal or like Deepcool, they realized that they can just sell the coolers directly and make more money, which is quite nice for them, right? But at the same time, they are undercutting their partners, which means that the OEM brands might not be competitive anymore. So they often can't survive anymore. If the 360 AIO maybe costs $30 to make, and the factory decides to sell this at $60 on the market, then this would work for them. But if you have an OEM in between, or like some sort of a trader in between, they would just have no more margin. They would be forced to sell their AIO at $100. And this would probably mean that they just don't sell any items anymore. And that's why this specific market, like air cooling, AIOs and cases, is super competitive, very difficult. And I will try my best to stay out of this, because it's a difficult market and there's no money to make in there. Especially the case market is absolutely crazy. And I will leave it to the companies that are good at this and they can offer this at a good price. And we will focus on keep doing what we can do good. So much for the first part of the Q&A. This took much longer than I originally intended. I've been talking for over 2 hours now, mainly because I have to switch also back and forth between German and English, which is making it difficult and my voice is about to give up. So thanks for tuning in for the first part. I hope you enjoyed it and see you soon to the second part.